From Asian carp to zebra mussels, invasive species have become more than just a nuisance to the Department of Natural Resources. Joining me right now to discuss what they're doing to try to combat these invasive species, we have Commissioner Tom Landwehr. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Julie.
So, Commissioner, let's begin with the latest. Zebra mussels were just found in July in the Whitefish chain of lakes. They're also in Lake Latoka near Alexandria. What should boaters be looking for?
Well, this is one of those, especially with zebra mussels, this is one of those issues where we really need to make users of our lakes aware of their personal responsibility. You know, we believe that most invasive species, zebra mussels, curlyleaf pondweed and so on, are probably transported by people moving a boat from one lake to another. Not the only cause, but one of the big causes. So we can't inspect, you know, every 800,000 boats that made 5 million landings last year. We really have to rely on boaters to do their inspections. So when they come out of the lake, when they come up on the ramp, you know, they should check their trailers. They should make sure there's no vegetation hanging on it. They should make sure the plug is out of their boat. They should empty their live well. They should empty their bait buckets, and just make sure that they're not the person who's hauling an invasive species from one body of water to another. And so, you know, the statutes really rest on that personal responsibility component, and that's the message that we've got to people, is we will try to make it easy for you to do the right thing, but you're still going to have to do the right thing.
And you've been spreading that message for quite some time now. Do you think the education is making an impact?
You know, last year our conservation officers reported about a 20% violation rate, and so there were a lot of, you know, that's a totally unacceptable violation rate, by the way, whether people weren't pulling their bolt plugs, whether they had weeds hanging from their trailers, whatever it was an unacceptable violation rate. This year, so far, we're hearing it's about a 10% violation rate. Now, I would tell you that it's still way more than what's acceptable, but that's you know, a 50% reduction in 1 year. So I think that's a pretty good indication that people are getting the information. And frankly, it's kind of hard for me to believe that people wouldn't be. I mean, I drove up to International Falls over the weekend. I don't know how many times I passed a sign that said, you know, stop aquatic invasive species. We did a little press conference out on a landing in Hastings last week, where we've got you know, the next generation of boat landings. It's going to have a place for you to pull aside to make sure your boat is clean. We're going to have a compost bin there so you can put the vegetation in. So we're really trying to make it, you know, obvious to people what they need to do and easy for them to do the right things.
Moving on to Asian carp, another species you're trying to fight. The University of Minnesota's Aquatic Invasive Species Center just received $8.7 million from the LCCMR to help develop new technologies. How far do you think this money can go towards keeping Asian carp out of the water?
Well, you know, we really are counting on research a lot, because all of the things that we've talked about, you know, boats with zebra mussels or putting in barriers to slow down Asian carp, are really things that just slow the spread. But ultimately, you know, they're still getting into places we don't want them to. If we want to get rid of them, we're going to need some new tools, and that's where the research center comes in. Dr. Peter Sorensen is looking both at ways to eradicate Asian carp as well as zebra mussels. So ultimately, that investment in research, we believe, is going to be where our you know, real answers are going to come from. So it's not a short-term endeavor; it's a long-term endeavor. You know, I think we have to recognize that we've got two very significant success stories in the state. One relates to sea lampreys, which you recall back in the 1950s got into the Great Lakes, decimated the lake trout population. Ultimately, after years of research, we found some chemicals that will control sea lampreys, and now lake trout have responded, you know, famously, and now we've got very healthy lake trout fisheries. And purple loosestrife, which even back in the 80s was starting to dominate many of the wetlands, especially in the west metro part of the state. Through research, we found a biocontrol. We found a bug that feeds on loosestrife and nothing else. We've been able to distribute that around the state, and you'll see in some of those wetlands that were just purple before, now you're just seeing little spots of purple. So research is the long-term solution here.
And what's the role of the DNR, in yours in particular, when it comes to this research? Do you just kind of take a step back and see what you or whomever it is presents to you, or are you active in the process?
As part of the legislation that funded the University Research Center, we also are collaborating on the direction and the specifics of the research. So there actually is an advisory board established for the Aquatic Invasive Species Research Institute, and I believe our first meeting is coming up sometime in August, and that's what we're going to talk about. You know, what we want to come out of there is very useful applied research, specifically targeted towards these you know, obvious challenges we've got. We don't want a bunch of esoteric stuff that is not going to have an immediate benefit for Minnesota.
So, Commissioner, I do want to ask, why do you think it's important to fund millions of dollars, hours of manpower on fighting these species? I mean, does the harm that they create warrant the resources that are used?
You know, and that is a very good question, maybe something that a lot of people don't understand. When you look at the impact of the variety of invasive species, and it ranges from plants like curly-leaf pondweed to zebra mussels to Asian carp, each one is different, but the bottom line for all of them is that they tend to displace the native species, the native ecosystem. So in the case of curly-leaf pondweed, it'll kill out the desirable vegetation. It'll become mats and mats of vegetation that's a challenge for boaters and swimmers. In the case of zebra mussels, they filter feed. They take out the nutrients in the water column, which, you know, in Lake Erie cleaned up the lake. That's great, but at the end of the day, they also kind of destroy that food pyramid that our native species are going to rely on, the minnows and ultimately the walleyes and the fish that we like. And in the case of Asian carp, again, they displace the native species by feeding on the same food that the native species do. So in all cases, you know, they don't eliminate sort of the biology of an ecosystem, but they change it in such a way that most Minnesotans would find that to be not a desirable outcome.
So you were asked shortly after your appointment as commissioner, why does the environment matter? And you stated the natural environment is our goose laying golden egg, especially in Minnesota. How healthy is our goose right now?
You know, I think it's if I gave a report card, I'd have to look at different segments of the environment. I can give you different grades on that. You know, let me just talk simply about forests, water, and prairies. And I'll tell you that I think our forests, by and large, are pretty healthy. You know, the challenge we have frankly had with our forests is that they're getting older. We're not using the forests as efficiently, as comprehensively as we could. And the problem with an old forest is it starts degenerating and creates problems like pest infestations and wildfire. Certainly we need old forest, old growth, and we can plan for that, but we need to make sure the rest of the forest is productive and managed in a healthy manner. Our waters, we know that 40% of our waters are impaired, and so we've got, you know, we're kind of in the middle there. We're probably a yellow light on the traffic stop sign there. We've got to do better with water, and of course the voters in 2008 gave us this great responsibility, this great set of resources to help clean water up. And the Pollution Control Agency, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the DNR are working collaboratively on moving the needle on that, getting to better water conditions. I think in the prairies, frankly, we're a little bit of a crisis. You know, the intense demand for crops and the high commodity prices, the high land value prices right now are compelling landowners to really farm every single acre. And, you know, nobody faults them for that. That's a business decision they have to make. But the unintentional consequences of that are that we're losing habitat for species that depend on grasses, you know, things as common as pheasants, but also as rare as, say, the Dakota skipper, you know, endangered butterfly in southwest Minnesota. It means that some of our runoff is more polluted than what it should be. So the PCA's recent study that showed the nitrate levels being unacceptably high. We need to do something different in the agricultural part of the state, and that's, I think, the place we're getting a failing grade. We're trying to work again with our sister agencies. We're working on what's called the prairie plan to put more grass out on the landscape. It can be done in the right places so that it not only provides habitat but gives the water quality benefits by cleaning up water quality, as well as helping recharge the groundwater, which is, you know, a critical situation in many parts of western Minnesota.
So will those be the focuses, the areas of focus next session for you?
You know, I think we've got much of the authority we need for that. The problem is in many things is funding, and it's not that the funding isn't there, it's just we have to get it directed in the right place. So you'll see that through the Outdoor Heritage Fund, the Lasarda Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council, the Board of Water and Soil Resources and DNR will be putting in a collaborative $40 million proposal to do grassland restoration. And that, if we get that kind of resources, we can be doing the right things out there. Of course, we got a nice set of authorities and funding for groundwater from the legislature this year, and much of that will be used out in the agricultural part of the state. And you know, going back to a previous discussion, we submitted a proposal to LCCMR for the trust fund for $5 million for aquatic invasive species as well, to do some of the grants to local units of government. So we're looking at these dedicated funding sources as being really the resources we need to address these emerging challenges.
Okay, Commissioner Tom Landwehr, thanks for taking so much time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.